Do we have any citizen input on non-agenda items? No. Okay, then we have to approve the minutes of the June 26th meeting and the July 10th meeting. We'll do that separately. Can I have a motion to approve the June 26th minutes?
Chair, I recommend we approve those minutes.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I will entertain a motion to approve the Planning Commission minutes from July 10th.
Mr. Chair, I will move to approve the July 10th, 2017 Planning Commission minutes.
I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Is there any new business? Okay. Should we be waiting for Laney?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Then we will move into the public hearing portion of this. The first one will be, we will consider a request for a zone change and comprehensive plan amendment for 853 and 861 South Redwood Street. That's ZC 17-01/CPA 17-01 Hostetler. The matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please be prepared to step forward to the microphone at the appropriate time. State your name, mailing address, and interest in the matter. For those people other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each, the opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for a rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the Planning Commission who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing the present matter.
Mr. Chair, one of the names on this application, Peter Hostetler, and I attend church together. I do plan to participate. It will not have any bearing upon conversations tonight.
Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time.
Drive by it.
Okay, drive by. Okay. Does any member have of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Seeing none, we'll move forward. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have the staff report, questions, if any, by us. Then I will open the hearing to the public for testimony. The applicant will have not more than 15 minutes. The proponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral, not more than 5 minutes each. And then a rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes. At that time, I will close public testimony. We will have questions, if any, by the hearing body, and then we will move to discussion and deliberation, and no testimony will be allowed unless specifically allowed by me. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Brian.
Thank you, Chair Savory, and good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for getting us started here. This application just involves a comprehensive plan map amendment. So we have land use designations on our comprehensive plan that indicate in this particular area that the 2 tax lots that are involved, that are shown here, are currently a low density designation on the comprehensive plan, and on the corresponding zoning map they are R1 low density residential zoning. So the intent of the application is to change our comprehensive plan and then follow up with the corresponding change to the zoning map, so they're both for medium density residential. That designation on the comp plan is MDR, and on the zoning map it's R1.5 zoning. This is a presentation here, and it's available because his original application submittal included a subdivision as well. He since has withdrawn that application because he's proposing to proceed with only dividing the lower tax lot into 3 lots, which means he only needed a partition. And there's various reasons. If you read through the entire report, you probably discovered some of those reasons. This is a map showing what is there today. There's 2 existing homes, 1 on each of the 2 tax lots, and the upper tax lot also has a detached garage associated with that house. And there also are some existing easements around the outside edge of the property. And 2 street frontages, South Redwood and Southeast 9th Avenue on the bottom. This is an indication of the original subdivision that he proposed, taking the 2 tax lots, reconfiguring the boundary that runs east and west that originally separated those, and then dividing the lower lot into 3 tracts and the upper lot into 2 tracts. One of the problems that we talked him out of early is that the upper tax lot, as proposed, would end up having a garage on an individual tax lot. And that's actually would be creating a nonconformity to have a detached garage without an associated primary use, which is a residence. And so they would have to tear that garage down in order to create that lot. And they weren't ready to do that at this point in time. So I think that's one of the reasons they decided it wasn't a good idea to go forward with the subdivision at this point. In trying to decide on the suitability of this request, there's quite a bit of discussion in the applicant submittal, and staff agreed with most of his review and findings related to the review criteria. We've added a couple of additional findings in that, first of all, it's a more efficient use of the residential zone land in the area. It extends that higher density land use designation, the R1.5 or the MDR land use designation that's found currently to the north and to the west of this property. It just extends that over to the street boundaries, basically, of South Redwood and Southeast 9th Avenue. The street boundaries become a good alternative dividing line between the difference between low density and medium density. As you go further south, then you have the low density designation, and you have the school property across to the east, across the street. The city's actually in a greater need of smaller residential lots than it is in the low density designation. So there's some potential of increasing the supply of housing choices by offering a greater variety of basically more affordable type housing. Because of the smaller lots, they're likely to be more affordable. And there was a traffic analysis limited in scope that was oriented towards the fact that whenever you rezone, you need to check to make sure that your transportation system plan anticipated the intensity of use that you'll have on the property if you rezone it. And in this particular case, that was taken into adequately by the transportation plan, and it indicated in that analysis that there was no expected further degradation of the traffic conditions on the two adjacent streets from doing this partition, is what he'll eventually be doing to implement some construction with this zone change and comp plan amendment. So based upon the submitted application, the facts and findings that the applicant and the staff agreed with that we found, we did recommend that this application be approved, and the Planning Commission send a recommendation for its approval forward to the City Council, who makes the final decision on comp plan amendments and rezonings. Any questions about this?
I have a question for you. Where on off of Redwood is it higher density than single family?
Well, immediately to the north and west, we have this same proposed R1.5 zone in the MDR designation in the comp plan. So it's adjacent to two areas that are already
Oh, it's adjacent to that.
yeah,
okay.
what he's asking for. So you can look at it as a contiguous extension of that, and it makes some logical sense moving that. These are the only two lots that don't already have that designation, except for the area on the other sides of the streets.
More questions? I have one. Over on page 5 of 6, which is 19, the big numbers, 5 of 6 in the little numbers, it says, although the condition of South Redwood adjacent to the subject property has deteriorated, staff would not recommend requiring physical improvements with the map amendments. So, fairly familiar with how South Redwood has deteriorated, but maybe you can define that better for me.
The number one reason, what that's indicating is that you actually can assign a condition to a rezoning if you feel like it's important enough to fix some sort of existing problem. In this particular case, we're not recommending that you do that because there's a subsequent application. It will be a partition for which you can actually, is a standard, a review criteria that you make a half-street improvement. And in this particular case, the street that needs the improvement is South Redwood, and it's actually county jurisdiction. So it really causes some problems and some confusions in that the county is the one that dictates what will or will not be needed and what needs to be done. And in this particular case, that's one of the other reasons that he decided not to do the subdivision, and that the county, having jurisdiction, was not going to allow him to keep the existing driveway to the northern lot, which happens to be his parents' lot. The applicant is Mr. Hotstetler. And because he was subdividing and reconfiguring all of the lots, they were going to make him move that existing driveway. So he's going to start with a less impactful partition of just the lower tax lot, where he had already planned on moving the driveway from the higher classification street, Redwood, to the lower classification street, which is 9th Avenue. And so he was planning to do what they desired him to do with the lower tax lot. So that's all he's going to move forward with. And we can get the improvements at that time that the county will be requiring for that street.
You have one question. The medium density residential, if I'm correct, that allows for attached dwelling units, correct?
It allows it allows detached or attached duplexes or triplexes, one of each on a single lot. So you can't do more than one, but yes, you could do a duplex or you could do a triplex.
Do we know if there's any plans for that? I just don't
No,
think that fits correctly in
the size of lots that he's indicated in this drawing here are barely big enough to put a single-family house on them. And so I'm quite positive that that's what's going to happen because of the size of the lots. He won't be able to fit anything larger.
Duplex or triplex would have to fit on one of the lots, not
Right.
across the three. Perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, do we have an applicant here that would like to testify? Okay.
Evening.
Thanks, Eddie.
Any proponents? Any opponents? Assuming that no one here is from the neutral zone either. Therefore, no rebuttal. Oh, we got one back here. We got to take her.
Frank, can you explain to us what's on each of them? Is this 5 configuration what's now proposed? I was confused with.
No.
Do we have any kind of a demonstration or any description on what is actually being proposed?
Yeah, I just went through in that what he's proposing is to take the lower tax lot, which there's 2 tax lots, the southern tax lot fronting on 9th Avenue, and dividing that lot with a follow-up partition application, which he's actually submitted now, and make 3 lots out of that. And the middle lot has the existing house on it.
Could you have people come up to the mic?
Yes, we will. The disembodied voice.
I was like,
Halloween, it's just around the corner. Any more questions? Okay. At this time, I'll close public testimony. Questions, if any? Apparently, we've asked all the questions. Do we need any discussion on this?
I don't think so. Pretty cut and dried.
Okay. Then I will entertain a motion to approve the request for a zone change and comprehensive plan amendment for 853 and 861 South Redwood Street, ZC 17-01/CPA 17-01 Hostetler.
Chair, I'll move to approve ZC 1701 CPA 1701 Hostetler for a zone change and comprehensive plan amendment for 853 South Redwood.
Any more discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I would encourage you all, this electronic stuff doesn't keep me in business. I sell paper, so let's get on the stick and start using paper again. Okay. We will now consider minor land partition and variance applications to partition a .21 acre property into 3 parcels. MLP 17-03/VAR 17-02 Bristol. The matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please be prepared to step forward to the microphone at the appropriate time. State your name, mailing address, and interest in the matter. For those people other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each. The opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for a rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing, present matter. Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. Does any member of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Okay. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have a staff report, and then questions by the commissioners, and then I will open the hearing for public testimony. Applicant will have not more than 15 minutes, proponents not more than 5 minutes each, opponents not more than 5 minutes each, neutral not more than 5 minutes each, rebuttal, if any, by the applicant not more than 10 minutes. At that time, I will close public testimony. We'll have any questions at that time. Then we'll have discussion and deliberation by the commission, and no additional testimony will be allowed. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about how we will proceed? Brian.
Okay, we have another quasi judicial case before us here involving a singular property. It involves a minor partition. That's minor because there are no new streets created by taking an existing tax lot. And the proposal is to divide it into 3 individual tax lots. The properties has an Northeast 4th Avenue address because there is an existing home on the property. It's located on the southern portion of that lot. And it's in a high-density residential zone, R2 zoning, all directions around it. If you go eastward, across the street and a little further, you get to the fairgrounds, and North Locust is the street running north and south on the east boundary of the property. This is a proposal, a tentative plan of the lot layout that's proposed, drawing a new property boundary very close but to the north of the existing home, and then another parallel property boundary giving you parcel 2 and 3 that are vacant, that are narrow lots intended to accommodate a common wall townhomes. So you'll have an individual single-family home on each lot with a common wall on the property boundary, which is basically a townhome. Remember, it's high-density residential zoning. So they will be getting closer to minimum density that you actually have in an R2 zone by further partitioning and developing this property. The only one of the issues that came up in trying to accommodate an efficient way to further develop a higher density on the property was related to the fact there was an existing home that they wanted to save, and they are actually asking for a minor variance to the rear setback, which would be the north side of that existing home to the brand new property boundary that's proposed. There is one point at, you can see that the back of the house slants, where it goes down to 9.5 feet rear yard, where a 10-foot rear yard is the normal standard for a corner lot. And so there's only a very minor point at which it's reduced down to 9.5 feet. That 9.5 feet is only a 5% variance. That is actually a variance that the planning director can approve. And I do support this particular variance. Since the minor partition comes before the Planning Commission, you guys can certainly make your own decision regarding the minor variance that is proposed, since it's before you as well. One of the other issues is that the existing home is proposing a new driveway that would be located off of North Locust Street, and this particular drawing is showing you where that pad for the parking would be located. There'll also be driveways accessing the parcel 2 and 3 to the north to the townhomes for individual driveways there. So in the staff report, we've indicated that one of the standards that's in our Public Works design standards, fairly new as of 2012, is that we now try to keep a 10-foot separation between individual residential driveways on local streets whenever possible. And so another way of looking at that is at the right-of-way line that you have 5-foot separation from an adjacent property line. So we've made a condition of approval to try to keep that 5-foot separation from the adjacent property lines of this partition to the existing home lot and to the lot that's further to the north that's not a part of this. Because you can see there's a driveway shown above in the lot further to the north as well. And so it's already practically on the property line. It's an existing driveway before we had that requirement. And so we're hoping that he'll be able to keep his drive 5 feet from that property line to comply with the new standard that we have today. Another issue is related to street improvements. When you do a partition, you always address half-street improvements. And on this particular request, we're talking about North Locust Street. We have a sidewalk, and there is no need for improvements on Northeast 4th Avenue, except at the very intersection where there'll be a needed ADA ramp. It's not built to current standards there. But the uniqueness on this particular project location is that the city has a street improvement project being planned for this section of North Locust Street. However, we're still having trouble deciding on the final design of that improvement. There is only 40 feet of right-of-way, which is very narrow. The rest of the distance of North Locust on further north, fully developed. It's an older area. Very unlikely that there's going to be an opportunity to ever obtain additional right-of-way. So we're not requesting any additional right-of-way on this property, even though we have very narrow existing right-of-way. Therefore, the design of the city project is trying to decide between balancing curb-tight sidewalks and whether they should be full standard 6-foot width that we require today, which if we do that, there'll be a need to eliminate parking on one side of the street. And so they're still wrestling with what's most important, a sidewalk on both sides of the street or parking on both sides of the street. And so stay tuned for whatever decision the city will finally make on preparing the construction drawings for that project. But long story shorter now is that we're asking the applicant not to make those half-street improvements at this time, but to have his engineer calculate the cost of a standard normal half-street improvement with a curb-tight sidewalk and contribute cash that the city will utilize in their project to complete a much longer and larger street improvement at this point.
Will that include the ADA ramp?
It
you
will,
mentioned?
yeah, it will.
Okay.
And that project isn't 100% scheduled at this point. It was originally scheduled to be done this fiscal year. It is not currently. So the anticipation is that it will be next fiscal year when the project's actually finalized and budgeted and will be constructed. And so we think it's a reasonable thing to wait and have his improvements, rather than doing them, have the entire project be designed as one in case his standard improvement doesn't match what they finally decide to do on the rest of the street.
So if you take the cash and that leaves the applicant free and clear, I mean, he can't come back to him later on.
And what we have to be sure of is that we place that money in a separate account, a separate liability account that will be assigned to this particular project and application, and that we need to get that project constructed and benefiting his property as soon as we can, so that his contribution is benefiting his property that he's trying to develop.
But it sometimes happens that these projects get delayed.
That's right.
Year after year after year.
That's right. And that's why we have to track it very closely. And we feel, and you know, I checked this out because I worried about that, is we need to be quite certain that this is a project that the city is moving forward on. And that's the indication I got from the Public Works lead person and the city administrator, that yes, they are going to move forward with a project.
And if it does not, what happens to the money?
Then at some point, we would return the money if in a reasonable time period, if you wanted to assign a time limit on that we return the money. Let me see if there was, I've already mentioned the driveway, the variance, and then I just made one note on here that infill home standards do not apply to a high-density residential zone property, but there are residential design standards that the new townhomes will have to abide by when they submit for building permits. So we've indicated that some of the conditions that were kind of unique to this had to do with the paved driveways, and that the lots are so narrow, we wanted to make sure that we could achieve the 5-foot setback from the adjacent property boundary. One of the conditions of approval, I'm trying to see if it's on here or not. Yeah, I think it's listed as condition 7 in the staff report, but it's the last one on this slide. It's currently worded that parcel 2 and 3 won't have a driveway wider than 12 foot. Well, a better way to word that, and I think a change that we would recommend that we do is to say that the driveways proposed on parcel 2 and 3 will have a 5-foot separation from the adjacent property lines. And if he wants to make a driveway wider than 12 foot, he's welcome to do so if he can meet the 5-foot separation distance. We have recommended approval of this. Get to that. I think I've gone through these others. With the conditions that we have listed in the staff report, with that one minor change to condition 7.
Okay, any questions?
Mr. Chair, I've got one question for Brian. If they do, the city does return the money, are they still required to make those changes?
Well, I hadn't really gone that far down the thought process, because we're so certain that the project is going to be done, certainly within 3 years, which I think is a reasonable time period, but it's planned for next fiscal year. And at that point, it's going to be kind of late for us to probably have him do improvements. So I think we're going to have to count on the city following through on its intent to do the improvements and utilize the funds that he's submitted.
Okay. Any more questions? I had one more. Back on the last page of this packet, the CAQNBY Fire Department would like the applicant to consider, I can't pronounce it, I think that it means Canby, I'm pretty sure. Would like the applicant to consider residential fire sprinklers due to the proximity of proposed buildings to other structures. I didn't notice that that was in the conditions for approval, but maybe this is something I should be asking the applicant, but what's the?
Yeah, I really can't address that. I think the fact that the fire marshal was wearing his fire marshal hat and was making a recommendation that they do that, but to my understanding, there's no requirement that they be sprinkled. If they had their druthers, they'd have a state law passed that would require all structures to be fire sprinkled. But he was pointing out in this particular case, when you're in a high-density area, it makes even more sense when you have so many structures close to each other to do that. But that would be a question to ask the applicant.
But at this point, it's just, we're just asking.
Right.
Any further questions? Okay, so do we have an applicant here? And apparently we have a phone call. So if you could step forward, state your name and address, and tell us about your project.
So good evening, Jason Bristol, applicant, 21733.
Is it green?
It's green now.
Okay.
Jason Bristol, applicant, 21733 South Highway 99E. This project, Brian did a great job of explaining what I am proposing. There is duplexes or common wall construction to the north, a couple different locations right in the Habitat for Humanity project that took place a few years back.
Speak into the mic, please.
Okay, so there we go. Okay, so I will say the house, I'm doing a complete update to the house. It's had many years of neglect, and that will be completely redone. The inside's almost done, and I'm just working on the outside at this point. So that will be actually a nice corner lot with an updated house, and it'll be kind of a lead into that area, which I think corners are always a good place to start when you are trying to rejuvenate and update an area that is in need of help. I think you asked about the fire marshal's recommendation. I will say that in all zones, R1, R1.5, and R2, all setbacks are the same. So side yards are 7 feet, and rear yards, depending on 1-story or 2-story, are all the same, no matter what zone you're in. So the only difference is that we have a common wall, and this will be a common wall that will be built for fire standards. And similar to all townhomes that have the shared wall and dividing line, requires quite an extensive build. There's actually 2 layers of sheetrock on both sides, and that's so that the fire can't travel through to the neighboring shared house. And that's what these will be as well. It's actually a very common practice.
Okay.
I'm willing to do the, my share of the half-street improvements, and it's just a matter of figuring out what it is going to be. Pat Sissel, my engineer, will come up with a number based on the plan, if we get that far with the plan. We're hoping we see a plan. This is kind of the goal. Any questions?
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any opponents to this plan? Anybody that's neutral that would like to step forward, speak? That time I had no rebuttal apparently, since no one talked against the project, so I will close the public testimony at this time. Any further questions of staff? Okay. Any deliberation or discussion? Then I will entertain a motion to approve the minor land partition and variance applications to partition a .21 acre property into 3 parcels, MLP 17-03/VAR 17-02 Bristol.
I recommend that we approve MLP 17-03/VAR 17-02 Bristol with the change to condition 7, which changes that to a
5-foot
5-foot
separation
setback
from adjacent property
from
lines.
adjacent property lines on the driveways.
Have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. We will now move along to, as soon as I get my little paperclip thingy. You know. Yeah, but I've got the big clip.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you sell those too, right?
I do sell those, yes, as a matter of fact.
Depends.
And they're not very expensive, so everybody can have one. We will now consider a request for site and design review, conditional use permit, and variance applications to construct a 73,215 square foot warehouse and building on 4.4 acres in the Canby Industrial Park, DR 17-06 /CUP 17-04 /VAR 17-03 VLMK /BE Group. Brian,
Okay.
actually, should I read
But
through?
I think you're probably okay if you want to say ditto to the
Ditto
public
to
hearing.
this all over again. Have to maybe open the water if I didn't, but, okay, so we're good.
Okay. This is located in the Pioneer Industrial Park, this proposed project. The BE Group, if I remember right, is currently located a facility in Wilsonville, and they plan on relocating here to Canby. And it's kind of a distribution facility for trying to think of it as pumps and farm implement type equipment, various equipment along those lines. And they also, in this particular project, are proposing some individual rental lease spaces, and they do not know who they might be at this point in time. So I don't know the exact division of the building. That may be something you'd want to ask the applicant. I didn't actually write this report, so I'm not that familiar with the details. This is not the most desirable thing in the zoning world, but you've got two parcels that they're proposing to purchase and develop, and part of one of the eastern parcels has two zoning districts on it. In this case, it's M1 zoning light industrial and M2 heavy industrial. The way our zoning code is set up, basically the same uses are allowed in each of those zoning districts. However, the M2 zone could also accommodate heavier industrial uses, and with the potential going through another process of if there was a need to look at a use that had some adverse environmental influences, either air or noise or vibration or something like that. And in evaluation of this particular request, there was nothing of that sort that was of concern. And so the uses that are proposed here certainly fit within the M1, the light industrial zone, even though they have considerable M2 zoning on the property. It fronts on northeast or southeast 4th Avenue, and has adjacent industrial uses on both sides. And this is part of the Trend Business Center, which is built along Sequoia Parkway and has the lots to the north of it here that have been developing in the past few years with a recent building just finished last year and occupied now. And so they're selling off these two lower parcels. One of the issues that we pointed out is that there is a utility easement that is on either side of the common property boundary of these two parcels. And the proposal is to build this large 73,000 plus square foot building over the property line, therefore over these existing utility easements. So we've indicated in the staff report as condition that they're going to have to replat this area to consolidate the lots and to gain consent from all the utility service providers that have the potential to utilize those public utility easements. It's our understanding that there are no utilities in those easements, but it is a process that they're going to have to gain consent from anyone that might have the potential to use those. So we're not anticipating that to be an issue, but that exercise hasn't actually been done, so it's being made a condition of approval. This is a layout, the site plan, and as you can see, it's a large building taking up a good deal of the site. However, in our evaluation of all the site and design review criteria, we found that they adequately meet all of the standards within our land development ordinance. They have two driveways, one proposed at kind of at each side, as they have a truck circulation that's around the outside of the property to go to the back where you actually have the loading docks. And one of the unique aspects that they've actually made a request for is that they've adequately and appropriately analyzed the parking requirements for this use and have shown on the drawing where 78 parking spaces could be placed to meet the ordinance requirement. But they're asking that 46 of those spaces be delayed because they know for sure that they don't need them. However, our ordinance requires them. And so they're asking if they can delay them. Staff has recommended that it's kind of an administrative problem to do that. It kind of sets precedence to do that. Every developer might request less parking than what our standards require. There are some logic to it in that no one wants a whole lot of extra pavement when it's not really needed. There's extra stormwater issues involved when you have to do that. And so what we've ended up recommending is that you strongly look at that delay, and if you have any desire to grant that we put a set time period on it, because otherwise, over time, it's going to be a red flag that's going to get lost, and we're going to have trouble administering, trying to enforce putting parking in 3, 5, 6 years later that they obviously can put in now. And we're not sure that the cost difference is all that great in delaying the parking with the size of this particular development. So I'm not sure whether it's really a stormwater issue or a cost issue, or maybe a little of both. The other big issue with this particular request is the associated variance request. And if you looked at the rather extensive traffic analysis that was done for this, it focused on the driveway locations. It's because they're located in the industrial overlay zone in the Pioneer Industrial Park that we have a 200-foot spacing between driveways on a collector street that 4th Avenue is. Ordinarily, in other places in town, On collector streets, the spacing is 100 foot between driveways. Well, the issue is that they have 450 feet of frontage, and so if they were to place one driveway in the middle of this site, they would have the adequate 200-foot separation between the two existing driveways on the properties that are developed on either side. And so they could meet the driveway spacing standard. But if you read through their variance applications and the findings that are associated with that and that staff has reiterated in our findings, it does cause them a hardship in terms of this size of building on this space and finding an adequate circulation that runs around the building that separates, which is a desirable thing, to separate your fairly intensive truck use from your employee parking, so they're not going through the same parking lot and that kind of thing, and trying to make that work on this particular site. We started some of the discussion out with why not separate the building down that tax lot line and put the driveway right up through the middle. And at some point, that wasn't what they were really desiring to do, and they've placed just one large building with some lease spaces in it. There are some issues with trying to combine driveways with the adjacent properties. On the west side, the existing driveway on the adjacent property is right on the property boundary, so it makes some sense to try to share that driveway. But there are some utility pedestals and that would be in the way and would be more costly to try to do that. There'd also be trying to gain approval and cooperation with the adjacent property owner. But it's, I think, mainly the extents, the cost factors that would make that less desirable to try to make a shared driveway on that east side. On the west side, there's more of a separation. I'm thinking that there's about 65 feet from the adjacent driveway. And if you read through the traffic analysis, they've given an overwhelming amount of information as to why meeting driveway spacing standards are important. But in this particular case, they also did an analysis of the current and anticipated future traffic levels, and they've concluded that both are going to be pretty low in this location. And with that in mind, that if you were not to have the 200-foot spacing, the conflict, because there's so many turning movements that are in conflict when you have close driveways, aren't going to be as much of a problem because of the low traffic volumes in this particular location. So they gave you a reason, some actual data that could support actually granting a variance of the driveway spacing for this particular use. And I think it should be based upon how adversely that would otherwise impact trying to make a viable use for this particular tenant on this property. See if there's anything else here I wanted to mention. Talked about the parking, and then the conditional use is the only thing I haven't mentioned yet that's also part of this request. That has become fairly standard now in the industrial park because we have a standard that we aspire to 12 employees per acre in any proposed use in our industrial park. We have even taken a request to the city council in the past 5 years to do away with this standard, and I think Planning Commission was involved in a recommendation along those lines. Because if you do an analysis in our industrial park, probably 60 to 70% of the current uses in the park do not meet that standard. And so it is an aspiration, and that's the direction that we obtained from the city council, is that they did not want to delete it because they still wanted us to aspire to a higher level of employment in our park, but to use your own discretion in looking at the suitability of the business that's being proposed. And are there other aspects that clearly indicate that it's a suitable use and it's what we're looking for in our industrial park? And we wholeheartedly think that this is the right kind of use for our industrial park. And it's very hard to determine how many employees might eventually be at this site because of the individual lease spaces that they will be having. They could potentially get close and even meet that standard at some point in the future, but we don't know at this stage. And so they went ahead and complied with our ordinance, made the conditional use application simply to announce that we may not be achieving that 12 employees, and the code asked them to make a conditional use permit. So staff concludes that the use is in conformance with our comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. The relevant site and design standards have been complied with. And with you addressing the variance application for driveway spacing, should you approve that, we certainly wholeheartedly otherwise recommend approval of this application, and would, however, request that you, if you approve the delay in the 46 parking spaces and their paving, that you put a definitive time limit, because they did say in their application they're not waiving it altogether, they're just delaying it. Well, we don't know how long they want to delay it. Any questions about this request?
Thank you, Brian. So do we have the applicant that would like to speak to this? If you'll, oh, you got props. If you'll.
Props. I also am not in the digital here.
Good for you.
I don't know if this is best for you to see it. I can turn it around for the audience to see it also.
If you could state your name and address, and we'll move forward.
Good evening. My name is Havlin Kemp. I'm with VLMK Engineering and Design, 3933 Southwest Kelly Avenue, Portland, Oregon, 97201. So I'm here representing the BE Group tonight. Brian was correct. The BE Group is a distributor of pressure washers and small farm equipment. They do have a facility now that they distribute out of in Wilsonville, and they would like to move to this facility here in Canby. Currently, they will only need about half the building, and so the building is set up. It could be a 4-tenant, multi-tenant building. And so they would take half. Whether they would take the east half or the west half has not been decided yet, but they would have room for 2 other smaller, about 18,000 square foot tenants in the other piece of the building. I'd like to talk about the variance request for the parking. So when we originally discussed it with Brian, Brian said that at a minimum we would need to show that we could provide the code required parking on the site. And so our intention is to design the site with all the required parking, design the stormwater system, design everything with the capacity to handle it as if the parking was there, but not provide the parking along the south side of the site on Southeast 4th. And we would just put a curb along, we wouldn't pave those parking spaces, we would put a curb along there and landscape it. I don't know that, truthfully, it's not a money issue. The BE Group doesn't have the use for it. My thinking in the way that the parking could be handled, no building owner wants to have a building for lease that doesn't have sufficient parking. And I would think that building permit applications for tenants in the unused portion of the building, the parking requirement for those spaces could be reviewed, and the requirement for removing the landscaping and putting in the parking spaces could be required at that time, at the time of building permit for a tenant improvement. Short of that, I understand staff's recommendation on that, and we would go with the board's decision on that. It was just the owner's request. We are showing parking on the north side of the site there. The BE group, the reason we've cited the building this way, the BE group has a need for outdoor storage. It's not long-term outdoor storage. They have constant turnover of their product. Things come in on crates that need to be uncrated before they're moved into the building. So they're removing things from flatbed trucks and that kind of thing in back of the building. We've cited the building so that all that operation occurs in the back of the building. We're proposing a screened fence around the perimeter so that is not viewed from the street. And we would end up with striped parking areas on the north side of the site that would never be used, and BE Group would be using that as a laydown yard for moving things on and off flatbeds. To follow up on the driveways, we understand that there's a 200-foot spacing requirement. We're trying to maximize the size of the site and provide a building that works for the BE Group here. Like I said, we're fronting Southeast 4th. We're providing the employee and minimal customer parking. BE Group doesn't really have a need for that, an occasional salesman or something like that. And BE Group would like to have the angled docks on the back of the building. And so with the angled docks, you would have trucks coming in both directions around the building, and hence the driveways on each side. And as Brian said earlier, we're always trying to keep truck traffic separated from passenger vehicle traffic. In this case, trucks would go around the building, exit to the east and west of the building, and passenger vehicles would just come in those same driveways, but then turn immediately into the parking lot in front of the building.
And exit through the same driveway?
They would use the same driveways as the trucks. In reviewing DKS's traffic report, they do the short-term and long-term predictions for traffic on Southeast 4th and at these driveways was less than 0.5% of capacity for both short-term and long-term. So the traffic volumes are very low on the street. They also have a diagram with predicted conflicts with a single driveway, and in their report they say with a single driveway you have 9 points of conflict of vehicles entering and exiting on a driveway with the street traffic. And in side-by-side driveways, which we would end up with here, you end up with 20 points of conflict, which is just really just a gain of 2 points of conflict. It's not a huge difference in the number of possible conflict points. But, I mean, you have such low traffic volumes that those points of conflict are really minimized.
I have to speak to my good friends at DKS because it wasn't more than a month and a half ago that DKS representative was sitting right where you're sitting and told us that we should be looking forward to traffic hell over the next 10 years. He wasn't kidding. So just, yeah, that's what conflict of what he's telling, yeah.
That's all I have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for this
I
gentleman?
have a question. With the driveway configuration that you have there, the two driveways, how far the spacing between the adjacent driveways on the other properties? Do you know?
We're approximately 88 feet to the driveway on the east side, and I believe we're only about 20 feet from the driveway on the west side.
Any other questions?
I don't know if I can ask a question to Brian, and you kind of mentioned from a variance for the parking. Would the city have any kind of recourse to go to whatever you lease that space out to say that you've got to put the parking in, or is that really up to the owner of the property?
So we're talking about the parking
Yeah.
delay. I think there is some potential that we could utilize a building permit, but I guess what I'm thinking of is that a tenant improvement permit, that's a building permit for the spaces, the 2 lease spaces, might be an opportunity where we could potentially look at the time of a tenant improvement, who's that going to be? And are they likely to be a heavy user of parking and say, hey, well, some of that 46 spaces needs to be added at this point? Because we understand that they know what they need. They don't know what their future tenant lease spaces might need, but if they obviously need parking, they'll be advocating for the pavement of more parking themselves as well.
That's still an administrative.
So, you know, the plus side is that we have landscaping for potentially a few years before we have hardscape parking spaces that might not get used. But we're just worried about administering it, and I would say that they're going to build the whole shell of the building, so it would be a tenant improvement permit that we might be able to address, triggering more parking if we find out or there's any evidence that they don't have enough, that we could require it at that time.
Have a question.
I might just share with you, one of the reasons that parking standards don't always work out for the applicants is because they're meant to be generalized. And some uses, same-size building, are much more heavy in employees than the same-size building in another use. And therefore, they're meant to, what if their business sells and decides to move to another town in 3 years? And now we've approved a building without, well, they've solved that. They've designed it with the required right amount of parking. They're just asking not to build it all right now. So, you know, it's not something that we've done here yet, not that we couldn't.
I have a question about that parking too, and it kind of coincides with the 12 employees per acre. Is that parking calculated on 12 employees per acre?
There's probably not any relationship there. That standard is totally separate from the actual ordinance parking standards. So they're not really related. If you had a business that clearly had 12 or more employees per acre, they probably wouldn't be waiving their parking at this point.
No, I understand.
So there is a
that.
relationship there.
But I think that to me, it's a warehouse. And I work in a machine shop, and it's a pretty big building. There aren't that many guys that work in it. It's only 4 or 5 parking spaces in used up in the machine shop. I don't know, I just have trouble sometimes with all of these regulations and calculating parking spaces and widths of driveways on people's property, private property, where they have a home, and we're telling them how wide they need to make a driveway or how much so that they can turn around big trucks or whatever in their driveways. And I just personally have a problem with it.
The parking that, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you if you weren't complete. The parking that you mentioned in the back of the building on the north side there, is that taken into consideration in the 42 spaces, or is that the code would require, or is that in addition to, could that take the place of some of those that you're?
The spaces on the north property line are the required parking spaces. So
Part of the required.
we would have to add back the parking spaces on the north side and the row adjacent to the street to meet the requirement.
The only worry I have about that is that once we make that exception, that we open Pandora's box to everybody in the industrial area, that wants to delay it. You know, that's my only fear for doing that. I understand the reason why you, and it makes complete sense to me why you would want to delay that. The only fear I have would be opening Pandora's box to everybody wanting to then delay it, and then how do we track it? You know, it creates another full-time position in the planning department.
Would the tenant areas that you are proposing, are they on the south side of the building?
Yes. Yes, the proposed, these are proposed double storefront entries. So BE Group would take half, and then there'd be a tenant space.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Me?
Are you done?
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm just curious, since you have the slanted truck parking at the back on both sides, now does the tenant that's going to be moving in intend to use both of those docks, or just the one on the south side, or on the east side, I guess?
So truthfully, right now they have use for half the building. Their intention is to grow into the building in the future. Until that time, they would lease out 1 or 2 spaces, depending on how many tenants would go there. So their intention is only to use the docks in the area of the building that they're using.
Any more questions?
I got one regarding ADA parking. Are those provisions going to be put in now or when they're leased out, or?
We would put the ADA parking spaces in near the storefront entries now.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seeing no opponents, are there any neutral parties? Seeing none, obviously there will be no rebuttal. I will close the public hearing at this point. Do we need any further discussion or deliberation by the commission?
Chair, I think we should recommend that the parking get done until we can maybe figure out how we would do a change in what we're doing there as far as how we would track that from a delay standpoint. I mean, obviously they're putting the provisions in from a building and water retention to suffice for that much parking, and so that would be my recommendation.
That they would do all of the parking at one time?
Do the whole building at one time.
I would
That's from a
have to
resale
agree with
value.
that.
Yeah.
I agree, especially with the impact of adding parking spaces later would do to that building and the parking now too. So if you only did half the parking lot, you're gonna come in at a later date and tear it all up and redo it. You're gonna create havoc anyway, plus we've got, we don't know how to finalize this and say, okay, you get X number of days yet.
Do you want to put that in the form of a motion and as one of the conditions of approval? Okay.
Gotta go up to the top. Mr. Chair, I motion that we approve DR 1706 CUP 17-04/VAR 1703 as provided by staff with the condition that they complete the parking as code.
Second.
Any further discussion?
What about the driveways?
Do we need to address the issue of the driveways in this, the variance for the clearances too?
I would think so, yes. Okay. How do you want to address that? How would you like to address that?
I would like to, as the builder proposes, the design proposed, to go with as is requested.
Yeah, so that, I think we covered that.
Makes more sense for the truck traffic to get in and out of the back and to approve it.
Okay. I agree.
The motion as it was made suggested staff's recommendation, which was approval of the variance. And so that means you're approving the design as it stands with the driveways as they are.
Okay. So can you read back what we're proposing there? Because we can't remember.
I'm not sure I remember. I think basically you just approved
I could restate
the
it.
three case numbers, subject to staff's recommendation with the conditions listed, and accept a finding that all the parking should be required up front.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Okay. So much paper around here. Okay. Then we will move on to final decisions. I'll entertain a final decision on ZC 17-01, CPA 17-01 Hostetler.
Mr. Chair, I'll motion that we do a final decision on ZC 1701 / CPA 1701 Hostetler.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll move on to, I'll entertain a motion for a final approval of MLP 17-03, VAR 17-02 Bristol.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve the final findings on MLP 17-03 / VAR 1702 Bristol.
A second?
Make a clarification that's subject to the change in condition number 7 that we agreed to.
That is correct.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. I will entertain a motion to approve DR 17-06, CUP 17-04, VAR 17-03, VLMK BE Group.
Mr. Chair, I recommend approval of that. I'll save reading all the numbers again, as we had previously stated in our recommendations.
A second.
And I'll make a quick clarification. In the findings right now, we'll add something under, it says commission findings for modification of standards. That's involving the variance that was requested. So we'll make a statement there or two about you approve the driveway variance and that your findings are in regard to requiring all the parking.
Correct. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, there we go. Items of interest from the staff. What have you guys found interesting that we need to know about?
So we do have our next regularly scheduled meeting. We have another minor partition scheduled for that meeting. We have 4 other applications that have been submitted that are in various stages of sending out notice and starting to prepare those. So that's 3 times more than we usually have. So we're very busy. And interesting, one of those applications has been in progress since 2015.
Talk in the mic, please.
Yes, sorry. Since 2015, and that is the 7-acre subdivision. It's the Sprague family on the end of North Maple Street. And just kind of, there's been lots of area neighborhood interest in that particular proposal. And so the application's now been made and it's been declared complete, and the hearing is set for September 25th. And so it's possible that you might start hearing from neighborhood people because there are a lot of concerns about that particular subdivision proposal.
Anything else?
No.
So we're going to be busy on the 11th and the 25th, it sounds like. Okay. Any items of interest that we would like to relay to Brian and his crew?
Go ahead.
What is the date of that, our next scheduled meeting?
September 11th.
There's a strong possibility I won't be here for that.
Any other?
Do we have another working session coming up? We can
Don't
kind of
have
maybe bring
anything
up
else
the
scheduled
conversation
right
about
now.
parking and stuff.
Was there a particular topic that you're?
Well, just the delay in parking. I think we
that.
should bring that up in a discussion and, you know, talk a little bit about when we have warehouses like that, if, you know, what the best direction is to go with that.
Yeah, and you were also going to talk to Brian Hodson regarding a joint meeting regarding traffic.
There's the city administrators will be partnering if that goes anywhere, and he's been aware of that, and we've had some pretty high-profile things on his plate right now. So we'll see if we can get something set up or not.
Tell him it's all about us. He can blow us off after that.
And, Mr. Chair, I will not be here on the 25th. I'll be out for work.
Okay? I will not be here on the 11th, and you won't be here on the 25th. Any other conflicts?
I'll have to see who's playing Monday Night Football.
Tyler, I'm afraid that's lame. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.